Heather Jameson, editor of the MJ. You've painted a difficult, challenging year ahead with greater uncertainty, highlighted that even some of the Conservative authorities don't expect that there's any pot of gold at the end of any rainbow or any kind of help. What do you think could be the flashpoints in local government over the next couple of months? Will it be overall funding as they are setting their budgets, some of the issues we've seen with Northampton, or is it likely that it might be specific statutory services? And what's the mechanism if somebody puts their hands up and says, you know, as the responsible officer, I cannot deliver it? Where does accountability go if someone does that?
Okay, well, lots of different questions there actually with different answers. So I think the budget setting is interesting. So we're now seeing lots of authorities re-examining their budget in year. But what will happen throughout over the course of the next few months will be that we will see the central government budget coming, and I'm not expecting to see any more money in there. Beyond that, we'll then be looking at trying to balance the books before we for the next budget at the end of March, and I think we're going to see quite a few councils falling over. At the moment, I think we're looking at trying to say throughout the sector that a Section 114 notice, the freeze on local authority spending because the budget is not balancing. So to produce a Section 114 notice has largely been, up until Northamptonshire, the last one was in 2000. So it's largely been seen as the nuclear option, as something you don't do, it's the end of your career. I think now we're starting to look at the situation where finance directors are saying this is not necessarily anybody's fault. If authorities are going to have to start doing that, then that's a way, it's a tool within your toolbox to try and ensure that the council balances its budget. But I think there's two potential flashpoints. One will be the next 114 notice, and the other one will be if we have and I say a service failure, but I suspect that there's quite a high chance that we'll start to see something like a baby P or something like that will, you know, these are people's lives. It's not just about the finances. It's actually the people who rely on these services, and some of them are life and death services.
And we've been talking over the past 2 days about a divided Britain. We've heard speakers describe the difference between cosmopolitan and communitarian, different kinds of communities. One of the things that's quite interesting is that as local authority funding is withdrawn from a locality, that also takes out huge numbers of jobs, lots of employment. A number of chief executives and others have said to me over past years that one of the things that they did was, with large numbers of part-time employees, often women, they were providing an extensive support structure in the period after austerity in 2008. And now all of those kinds of jobs are being stripped out with a huge effect in the local economy. Isn't that a downward spiral for some places that are not seeing, you know, an upside or a winning side in any of the new economy areas?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. So I would say actually Lord Heseltine once described that to me as the areas that can promote economic growth should, and the areas that can't. Actually, that's the argument for making sure that there is a public sector infrastructure, like a big teaching hospital or a big research facility that is funded by central government in the areas that need that just don't have other economy there. So I think the importance of local authority jobs to some areas is quite substantial. It's ideally, what we want is to boost the economy with economic growth that comes from outside of the public services, so that it's money coming in, within the global economy, international companies wanting to come to Britain. At the moment, the uncertainty of Brexit and how life is going to look afterwards, I think you would struggle to encourage a big multinational to come to your area from abroad if they were not certain what the picture was going to look like post-Brexit.
We've looked on a number of occasions at places like Preston and Lancashire, where the councils have said, well, if we are going to be spending public money, then we're going to spend it locally, or we're going to have a look and see how the anchor institutions, as they call them, the local authorities, the police, the universities, the hospitals, and to see whether or not they can make sure that more of the money they spend is spent locally, because it's better, they claim it's better value. So in Preston and Lancashire, they were claiming that they had redirected, nearly 200 million into the local economy. Is there any evidence of other authorities doing that kind of thing? Is that an increasing culture of trying to think of the economic impact of the spending that they do have?
I think, I think all local authorities will have an idea of their local impact. I know there has been research by APSI, the Association of Public Service Excellence, on the impact of the public sector pound, as they describe it. I think across the country there are a few authorities that do that. Off the top of my head, not entirely sure. I'd have to check.
You mentioned judicial review. Now, 30 years ago, judicial reviews were relatively uncommon. They were quite exciting when they happened. They were often about personal cases of injustice, and they took years and years to come to fruition. But if people are using judicial reviews, is there any risk of legal stalemate, standoff in local government, making things worse or dysfunctional?
Yeah, I think so. So the main issue of judicial review we've got at the moment, or the one that I was referring to, is Northamptonshire have created their budget, and they've cut back to core services. They're not. I think they're just above statutory services. So most local authorities now will be looking at how long they need to wait before they go to core budget, and then how long after that before they go to statutory services alone. So the Northamptonshire offer is just above statutory services. There were only a few other things in there, and libraries was one of the things that they cut. It's the library service that has been that's being questioned, and that's the one that's gone to judicial review. I think in Somerset they're looking at making cuts which will have an impact on disability services. I think that looks like it might be likely to be subject to JR. I think if local authorities are in a stalemate where they currently can't earn extra money from raising, the reason councils can't go bust is because they're tax raising authorities. If they can't raise any money by increasing their council tax without a referendum, which may well come back as a no. They can't cut their services because they're going to be judicially reviewed. So they will have nowhere to go. I don't know what the answer to that is. I don't know how, if you can't increase your income or cut back your outgoings, personally, with my personal finances, I wouldn't manage it.
In previous periods under Mrs. Thatcher, and then a bit more in the late 80s, of course, these kind of stresses on local government were accompanied by political rebellions, can't pay, won't pay attitudes about rates, and up in Scotland, and subsequently the activities of Militant and others in Liverpool, which interestingly were brought to an end by Section 114, a crisis around the budget. Is there any sign of, if you like, political rebellion, or anybody planning say no strategies or precipice strategies, or is it a managerial approach and challenge?
Well, I think the whole the whole psyche behind the momentum, behind some of the moves that have been made in the Labour Party. I think we are seeing some of that starting to come through. And if you look at, I think the managerial strategy that perhaps maybe was embedded within the Haringey development vehicle that was trying to regenerate housing within Haringey, because it was done with a private sector developer. It was a pragmatic approach that was less about the political side of things and was more a move to do things best way financially, or arguably get into bed with the private sector, depending on your political view. I think that ran into a stumbling block because politically it just didn't pass with the local people. I think, yes, I do think we are going to start seeing some objections to that sort of thing.
Now, we have on the scene some new voices in devolution in local government. We've got the elected mayors and others beginning to find their feet. The Conservative conference is going to be in Birmingham. Several of the speakers over the past 2 days have said that on a number of issues, lots of the mayors, whether it's Andy Street, Conservative in Birmingham, or Andy Burnham in Manchester, are basically saying the same things, the same distress signals. Any predictions as to how local government will feature in either of the main conferences, either Conservatives in Birmingham or Labour in Liverpool? Well,
interestingly, often they don't feature much. I think both often have difficulty having their voices heard. I think Andy Burnham in particular has done a great job of putting forward the voice of metro mayors. There is one school of thought that says that the metro mayors and the combined authorities are not technically local government. They're between local and central government, and I think whether you see, but to have the big political voices talking about place, I think is a step forward. So I know Andy Burnham's made a big speech today about the impact of Brexit on Manchester. So I think moving forward, it's good to have those voices about talking about our cities and places outside Whitehall and Westminster.
And you mentioned Andy Burnham, making a statement about Brexit and impact. Have many local authorities done impact statements in the way that their public can understand them? I mean, certainly, Dover in Kent, and some of those that would see themselves in the infrastructure front line. But how much awareness and how much work is being done in local government that might make the impact of Brexit tangible to people in their locality, which is the point when many people think it's the only thing that people think will cause individuals to reassess Brexit or their original vote. Have they done the impact statements, or are they sitting on them?
Yeah, so there's lots of thinking going on about this. I think, as with everybody else, you, me, central government, and local government, all included, I think it's really hard to see what the impact will be until we know what we're actually doing. And I think that's the slight difficulty that keeps coming back. There is all sorts of discussions going on about well, I should be aware, public sector staff, quite a lot of them, care workers, are from the European Union. We've got quite a lot of different strands in addition to the legal aspects. Yes, they are all doing impact assessments, but what the final outcome of that will be very much will depend on what Theresa May does as a final Brexit deal.
And in a slightly more sweeping question, in the 1980s, the Conservative government under Mrs. Thatcher effectively nationalised school education. Local authorities were still hung out to dry, but in a lot of the funding and to reassure the key parts of their vote, They also ended up nationalising the business rates and the relationship with business. There were signs in Mrs May's early period and some of her advisors that she might be thinking about reversing some of that. Can you see any scenario in the big changes over the next year or 2 years in which certainly the Conservative Party might take the view that actually there has to be very big change in the whole relationship between central and local government, or will the controlling hand of the Treasury be as sort of firm as ever?
Well, I think I might have mentioned I am an eternal optimist, and I don't think I'd do my job if I didn't think constantly, and I'm constantly disappointed, that somehow, somewhere along the line, somebody would realise that local government is quite a good delivery mechanism. And my experience of this has tended to be that most of the central governments start off being very centralist and controlling, and then sort of towards the end of their term suddenly realise that actually local government might be useful and start handing things over, largely just before there's a change of political control. At the moment, I think central government seems to be handing most things over to LEPs and combined authorities. I don't see much in the way of devolution directly to individual authorities. Metro mayors, absolutely, they will hand powers over to, but I think we've still got a long way to go. I think it's absolutely the right thing to do that the government does realise that local government can do quite a lot of the things that they need to be done.
And what about in managerial terms and efficiency, the merging of managements across local authorities, or is that trend reached its peak? I've seen some people saying that the solution to Northampton might be 2 new unitary authorities, but is the merger, certainly around districts and others, merger of management functions and back office, is that still carrying on apace?
Yeah, so effectively, the financial situation is forcing the hand of quite a lot of local authorities into reorganisation. There is no silver bullet to be able to deal with the financial cuts on this level, but there are lots and lots and lots of small things that can be done, and having a shared staff is quite a small thing in terms of budget, but it's just one of a series of tools that local authorities are using. The Northamptonshire unitarisation, the two unitary model is likely to go ahead now, and I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't see, the same is happening in Dorset, I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't see that starting to happen in lots of other places too. Now,
I thought it's got a bit of a political edge to it. Is there any sign that in-housing is growing in speed as opposed to outsourcing? We have the high-level dramas around things like Carillion, but there have been other episodes, and there is clearly a bias towards that amongst some of the political campaigners at Jeremy Corbyn's end of the spectrum. Where do you think the trend is going to go on in-housing and outsourcing?
So I would argue that that's no longer a political question.
Right.
So I think so many years ago you could tell the colour of a local authority by whether or not they held their services in-house or whether they outsourced. Now it's a much more mixed picture. I think what happened when we faced the first round of cuts within local authorities in about 2010-11 was we saw quite a lot of people rush to outsource because they didn't think they could afford to carry on keeping their services in-house. Now we're further down the line, they're all bringing everything back in-house again because it's the only way to control the cost. And of course the Carillions of this world has meant that a lot of local authorities no longer have faith in the big outsourcers, so there's a lot of lots of things like that going on. I think if you look across the board to where at the politics of in-house services, you'd probably now be surprised at which authorities are holding on to their services. It's not clear-cut in the way that it once was.
And a final question. Female editor of the MJ, is there evidence of improving gender profile at the top of management in local government?
Yes. No, I'm really...
News from the front?
This is, yeah. So I will... so I don't think the stats are changing a huge amount. So it's something like 70-75% of women in the local government workforce compared with overall, because we have quite a large number of dinner ladies, care workers, that kind of thing. Whereas it's about it reversed, about 30% of chief executives are women. But what we have seen in the last year or so, I would suggest, is some of the huge, big local authority jobs going to women. So out of the core cities, quite a large number of the biggest local authorities in the country, including Manchester and Birmingham, and indeed the West Midlands Combined Authority, are all run by women. So that's, I think, it may not be a step forward in numbers, and I haven't done the figures for a few months, but we're certainly seeing some of the really important jobs going to women, which is a big step forward as far as I'm concerned.